Hello class and welcome to today's lecture. In this lecture we're going to be talking about implementation. So let's get started. Implementation involves leading and coaching people to use their abilities and skills most effectively and efficiently to achieve organizational objectives. So in the context of this class we've discussed strategy, how to form strategies, how to do all the analysis underneath strategy, and then how to put together plans so the organization can achieve its goals and objectives. Now, after you have a plan written out, the next step is that you have to implement it. And it doesn't matter how good your strategy is if you can't implement the strategy successfully. Implicit in executing the strategy successfully is the culture that the organization exists within. Organizations with strong cultures tend to be resistant to change. That's because they have deeply rooted policies, procedures, and actions and beliefs that the employees have been operating on for a very long time, and to some measure of success, presumably. So when something is broken, people are less likely to try to fix it, in a sense. So change is very difficult. So if your strategy is focused on doing something different than what the employees are normally used to, you're going to find a lot of resistance. As always, any true change comes from the senior management first and then moves down the organization. So to that extent, the senior management, the CEO and his or her roundtable must make up the rules and policies and have the strategy in place and then drive that strategy through the organization. And from there, cultural change begins to take place. But I want to make sure that everyone understands that changing an organization's culture is incredibly difficult to do, and most companies that attempt it result in failure. This, however, does not mean that your strategy has to result in it. It's just that you should take these things into consideration while developing your strategy so that you have a culture that can support the strategy, and if changes need to be made, those changes can be made within reason. To this extent, you should ask yourself several questions. One, is a proposed strategy compatible with the current company culture? Can that culture be modified in order to make it fit with the new strategy? Is management, senior management, are they willing to support the changes that are necessary for the strategy to be implemented? And is the company willing to accept any delays or cost increases in the short term that may take place because of this particular? This slide walks you through the questions that I just posed on the previous slide. So I recommend that you take a moment to pause the video and look through this slide to see whether the answers to the questions are, whether they be yes or no, and what the appropriate response or action is. As mentioned in the previous slide, strategic change really starts at the top level of the organization. This means the CEO and the other various leaders need to communicate this vision through their direct reports so that it permeates through the entire organization. It also helps if you provide supporting information in regards to like how competition is doing, how the strategy is going to help the company do better, in order to help persuade people to follow and understand the recommended strategy. Now that you have your strategy, the next step is to create an action plan. Here's where the rubber meets the road, where you write the specific actions, time frames, cost, budget that are associated with implementing your strategy. And you write that out for every person that's involved. So this action plan should have the dates when each action is going to begin, who's responsible for carrying it out, who's monitoring the timeliness of these actions, the financial costs, and then any contingency plans should there be a problem that emerges that was not thought of previously. Action plans are important because they serve as the link between the strategy and actual what you can and can't do. And then with that, all the way to the evaluation and control, which is the constant monitoring to make sure that the strategy is doing what it's supposed to do, that it's delivering on the objectives that it's supposed to deliver. It also highlights the actions that need to be done today in order to implement the strategy and how they differ from previous operations. There's a concept that's called management by objectives, MBO. It's been around for a long time, and many organizations use this to govern their companies. MBO encourages participative decision making through shared goal setting and performance assessments based on achieving the stated goals. This works by establishing and communicating organizational objectives, setting individual objectives, developing an action plan, and then reviewing those performances. Now, what's important to note here is that each employee is identifying what they can do and what they can do, how they can deliver on the objectives that were laid out in front of them. And this often works in an overlaying fashion, meaning that the CEO has his objectives. He goes to his direct reports. They say, this is how I can help the CEO fulfill his or her objectives. And then they take that subset of the CEO's objectives and they pass it on to their direct reports. And it continues in that pattern all the way down throughout the entire organization. Another important concept to be aware of is called total quality management. This is a philosophy that is committed to customer satisfaction and continuous improvement. The objectives here is that we could always do better as a company. We could always improve our products and services. Everyone in the company is important, and everyone's actions in some way or not another affect the product that we serve and the customers that we serve. Greater flexibility in adjusting to customer shifting requirements, and also lower costs through quality improvement and elimination of non-value added work activities. So as part of TQM, there's an entire review process of all the steps that go into making the product, delivering our services to the customers, and we try to eliminate any non-essential actions and non-value creating actions out of that process. So this also helps us to form strategic plans that are effective and also gets employees on board with implement. And lastly, when it comes to understanding culture, there's a very popular framework called Holsted's cultural dimensions. We have it here. There's 5 components of it. And as you're developing your strategy, you're trying to understand how well the culture of your company will fit with the strategy, you may want to consider using this model, this framework. So the 5 parts are power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, and long-term orientation. It is well worth it to take a few minutes to Google Holsted's cultural dimensions or any of these attributes here to understand what they're saying in a deeper level, right? I'll briefly cover them now, though. Power distance refers to the level of respect for authority that individuals have within a company. Companies that have high power distance, they basically believe that whatever the management says, we should do it and don't question it. Companies with low power distance, they believe that while managers are important, we have to follow their instructions, we have the right to question or challenge their decisions or their instructions if it doesn't seem quite right. So in a low power distance culture, employees feel more empowered to speak up. They feel as though they're valued more as individuals and that they're not simply robots that are designed to follow instructions, but instead they should have a voice and opinion of their own. Uncertainty avoidance, this refers to the amount of risk that a company or employees are willing to take. In companies that are high uncertainty avoidance, this means that they do extensive planning, they probably have longer decision-making cycles before actually making decisions, and they tend to have greater hierarchy. Companies with low uncertainty avoidance, these are companies that are more willing to take risks. They tend to be flatter organizations, so there's not as many layers of management, and they tend to make decisions quicker. Individualism versus collectivism. This refers to what a person regards as the most important. Is it yourself as an individual, or is it the group that you're part of? So in Western cultures, individualism is the prominent value that's promoted, meaning that we have the saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So the individual who's making the most attention, the most noise, they're the one that gets the attention. They're the one that gets the support and the resources, while the others may go lacking that are quiet. In your Eastern cultures, they're more collective in orientation, and they have a saying that says, he who pops his head up gets hit back down, similar to that game of whack-a-mole, meaning that the person who constantly draws attention to him or herself makes themselves the center point. So when there is something bad or something wrong or punishment to be given out, it's going to most likely be directed at that person who's constantly drawing themselves to be that center of attention. So instead, they focus on working as a group and promoting the group in its success and totality, as opposed to the successes of one individual person. A good example of this is to think about the NBA basketball league. In America, our culture is very individualistic. So we'll have a team that just won the championship, but we tend to promote 1 or 2 players as the most important players on the team. If we were looking at Eastern cultures, they wouldn't tend to do that. It would be, we did this as a team, it was a collective effort, everyone's actions were important. Masculinity versus femininity. Please note this is not male versus female. Instead, what this is talking about, what does the company reward in general, masculine traits or feminine traits? Masculine traits tend to be traits that are aggressive, competitive, dominant, authoritative. Those tend to be masculine traits. Feminine traits tend to be kindness, concern, willingness to talk, willingness to share. Those tend to be feminine traits. So when you look at the culture of a company, you want to ask yourself, those people who are successful in this company, do they tend to demonstrate masculine traits or feminine traits? And you want to consider that in terms of your strategy development and how it would affect the implementation of your strategy. And the last one here is long-term orientation. This refers to the time horizons that the company tends to work on when making plans. Short term would be pretty much anything less than 12 months. Long term, at least by American standards, is anything over 5 years. You'll find that American companies tend to work on 12-month cycles. We may have a 5-year plan, but we reevaluate and assess it every year, and we focus on kind of a 12-month or shorter time frame for achieving our goals and objectives. Whereas other countries, particularly like those in the Eastern world, they may focus on a long term, but their long term may be 10, 15, or 20 years. So these are the 5 dimensions as mentioned in Hofstede's cultural model, and they should be considered when you're thinking about how your strategy is going to be implemented within an organization. That wraps it up for this lecture. If you have any questions, be sure to send me an email or reach out to me in class. Thank you very much and have a good day.